right? We don't see some of those below the surface that we don't talk about. We don't wear little name tags that tell us about where a student might be struggling. Because if I'm worried about paying off my burst car bill, studying for my chemistry test may or may not be that important to me. I came to Action Tutoring because that's what I'm supposed to do, but I'm already sitting there thinking, can I pick up 2 more hours at a shift tomorrow? This is not your issue, and I hesitate to use that word. That is not what I'm asking you to discuss with students, just to be aware, as you all feel too, there are always other things on our mind, right? And then if I'm to look at this in a global standpoint, wow, does it flip, right? We're not talking 60% white. If we're looking racially, we're talking 60% Asian, right? So what we see in our space, especially here at the University of Oklahoma, is very different than the global space, right? When we look at how many people live on $2 or less a day out of 100, we're talking up to 12 again, 14 people. So if I'm just using examples of both race and economic status, there's a whole host of other things that we're still needing to consider about you as well as the students that you serve. So I'm going to ask you to tell a little bit about yourself. And there's white paper turned over. Everybody needs one of these. You may have done this before, right? These are kind of the identity circles. I really like that it's a circle, right? Because who knows what's going to be on top at a certain point, what will be below, those kind of things using the iceberg. And so all I want you to do is just without thinking too hard, there are characteristics that are numbered, write what comes to mind first, okay? And Elise, no, I did not have the favorite music piece. I like that it's on there. What's yours? Yeah, okay, good. I'll make sure. Okay. Okay, now I maybe as you're finishing it up, I'm going to give you the next directions, okay? I want you to share, so be thinking about it, if you feel comfortable, at least one thing from that circle that you've written down. Just one thing, it doesn't matter what it is, but I'd like you to kind of share it with your other group members. So I know we're still finishing, so we don't start quite yet, but I just want us to get to know each other just a little bit better. Dad, what happened? It's probably because I'm in the room. It seems like a long standing issue. Hello, Amy. We're so glad to see you. Hi, Amy. All right, anybody still need another second? Okay, so let's go ahead and share just one item. Okay, if you really get talking, I'm going to give your group a minute to share. All right, go.
Oysters? Really? That's your favorite?
I think that's wow.
I like pizza and
I like
anybody ask them? I never know.
I'm originally from Iraq, but also
All right, last person speaking has a chance to finish up. Excellent. All right, Christine, if you'll take us to the next slide, please. I appreciate that. All right. I don't have enough time to elaborate. What I'm hoping that we realize, while these identity markers were not necessarily what you see on our more traditional role-related markers that we often share with each other when we're doing diversity exercises, the level of diversity is great, right, among all of us. And these might be things sometimes where you find you can relate to the students that you are serving. So just another way for you guys to get to know each other, but also be thinking about about it in this more academic, larger sense, because, going to the next, if you will, Ms. Christina, thank you. Culture, right, is shared, right? It's a symbolic act that we do with each other. We're creating a culture today by having this 8-hour training, right? You're learning what my expectations are. You're learning my style of leadership. You're learning a little bit about each other as new folks talk to returners. You are starting to understand what is the culture of action tutoring, right? And we can change that, right? We can find places where there needs to be improvement, and we can find places where we really do things well and share those with each other. Because guess what? We get to do this again in January, right, Nick? I know, very exciting. And so we'll revisit some of these elements, but just remember that this is kind of where it's going, right? And we share this culture with our students. And so while all of your sessions will look a little different because of the subjects, the variety of subjects we teach, there are still certain norms that we expect. Those of you who just went through Tutor Basics, we talked about how important it is to greet people, right? How important it has come up many times about how to relate with each other. How important it is to break it down for them. These are things that you guys do consistently across the board. All right, so moving on. Thank you. So what I'm wanting is you to start thinking about how you build this rapport with folks. How do you start, and you think throughout the rest of today, what that's going to look like for you. What's a way in which you greet students, right? And when I first started doing it with my clarinet studio, I would say things like, hey, how's the week been, right? I want to relate to them first. And then they already know what's coming next. I only practiced 3 times. Okay, well, were those 3 practices beneficial, right? But I really try to be consistent with my students. How I ask the question might differ. Because some students will walk in, especially once they get comfortable with me, they just sit down and say, this was the crappiest week of the month, you know, and then they tell me, oh, John, by the way, I practiced. You know, I don't have to ask the questions. But think about how you want to share yourself with others to build this rapport. So to get a little bit technical, if Christina will take us forward there, this is what people study. Some of you may even, do I have any geography majors? No, I don't think so. Minors? Okay, I don't think so. So geography is this wonderful, multifaceted discipline. And the research now in the 21st century is kind of looking at space and place. And so what I want you to think about is the blue space. That's what we are creating through the schedule, right? We're saying where you go, when you go, and who's going to be there, right? It's the material location. Then the meaning is kind of what we've been getting at by getting to know each other, right? How do we create this meaning? By listening to each other. How do we create this meaning? By maybe sharing some piece of our identity with each other. And that's what creates right there in the middle, right, with this concentric circles. That's what creates this place that we call action centers. So there's a lot going on in creating this culture. There's no quiz on this, all right? I just want you to be thinking about how we're literally taking a physical space, we're taking our own lived spaces, and we're bringing them together to each of us create these different action centers. Okay? So, meaning and faculty impact. There's great research out there, and I think if you was like, if you will, addendums to faculty, right, or beginning faculty for some of you, right, it is true that you are the leader in that space. And what you do in that space will ultimately drive that culture. And so what you do and do not respond to creates it. So what you do and do not respond to. And so in relation to people's identities, I'm not trying to make you diversity experts. That's not what I'm trying to make you. I'm just trying to make you conscientious as you go back to the iceberg model that you're only seeing this, right? And there is all of this below the surface. So if for some reason you sense, because you're great sensors, all of you in your different ways, that you aren't connecting with a student, please take that extra time to think about why, right? It could very well be on the student at the end of the day. But is there something we could be doing differently? Can we get them a different tutor? Can we find a different time for them to meet up, right? Sometimes those little pockets develop, and this is when I see you guys come in and do those little by appointment groupings, and those are wonderful. So what can we do in relation to that? I think there might be one more, right? So we have a case study that Elizabeth is going to lead us through in relation to kind of building this report. So Amy, can I put you to work? Sure. Okay. Amy's one of our returning tutors. Everybody can say hi to her.
Not really. She's
Well, returning tutors in the sense that she's a grad student. I'll take this half the room.
old now.
All right.
She's so old.
You guys speak? Okay.
Don't worry, you're still tall.
Okay, so we're passing these out so you can kind of take a look at this. This is a case study about building rapport. I just want to let you know as you're reading this, whether or not some of this, it might be more something that you can relate to personally. This has happened in the past, whether you are on one side of it or the other. And I invite you to read it in the sense that putting yourself in both of the roles. Both the role of the one side and the role of the other as you're reading it. I'll give you a couple of minutes to kind of look through that. Well, about 30 seconds to read through that and look at the questions, and I'll come back in a second. Alright, and as you're kind of finishing reading this, go ahead and start talking with the groups that you've been getting to know at your table. Those questions at the bottom, what would you do if you were playing David's role, if you were the PLA? Maybe what are some of the considerations that David should be thinking about with Maria's cultural competence? And how to respond to Maria in that sense? I know some of you are still reading, but once you've finished reading, start sharing with your group.
It's kind of a silly example.
Okay, that's fine.
I think it's weird.
That's what I got heard.
Yes.
She's already and say, yeah, I'm Asian. Or something. I mean, seriously. I mean,
We don't need to be
yeah. I personally do not take it too seriously. Because it is a compliment. It is to say, hey, you're Asian, you're smart. And it's not putting down hard work. You say,
I don't think I can take something like that.
that's how I would approach it.
I don't think
It's kind of like saying, hey, you're good, you have a really nice handwriting. And say, hey, you have good handwriting because I write it's not because I'm a girl. You could get mad. Or you could say, thank you.
you mean it just easier, so you understand, like, not everybody thinks
Any more seconds on that?
what am I going to do?
What if someone said you're successful because you're white?
I don't know why he didn't just say that.
So I don't know how necessarily respond depending on the situation.
I think responding like doesn't.
4, 3, 2,
Just to neutralize the situation.
1. We're back. All right. So what are some of the things that you came up with? I'm going to point at a couple of tables, and I just want you to share as a table something that came up. So how about this back table back here with Josh and Jack?
What's the question?
What are some things you came up with as you were discussing? Can you share some of it?
Kind of like, I said like a really like big deflection, like, you know, like try not to like really like pay too much attention to it. Like, you know, I'm not sure what you mean, but let's keep going, you know, with the next question. First one.
Okay.
Just never take it personally, because, you know, we're all awake people. We all know people say stupid things. Just like go on.
Okay. Now I'm looking for someone who might argue for the other side of it, maybe play devil's advocate for me. Maybe a way to not take it, I don't want to say take it seriously, but I want to say address it rather than to look over it. Sala?
Okay, so if, and this has happened to me before too, just because, you know, but anyway, so I would just be like, I didn't come here, like I'm not where I am just because of like my DNA. I'm here because of how hard I've worked. you know. And like, I would also kind of like give her some leeway because she's like a freshman, first semester. She came from like a very pampered life maybe, like homogenous environment, you know, so like, obviously I wouldn't go off on her or anything, but just like in a joking way, I would be like, you know, like, if you just do your best and work hard, you'll also be able to like ace this class or something, you know. So like, I would address it, but like, I wouldn't be mean to her or, you know.
I think that's great. Or some sort. I like the part you said about joking. Maybe say, oh yeah, because you know DNA also made you X, Y, or Z. Right? Oh yeah, because I got that X and I got that Y. I also play piano. That just makes sense, right? I think that's great. A good way to joke about that. Any other responses for either way, or something else? Have we not considered something?
Well, me, I don't like conflict, so in that specific setting, I'll kind of play it up, kind of brush it off to the side and move on to the next question. But I was thinking maybe you could take that person, like Marie in this case, one-on-one, and kind of like discuss it in a really friendly and respectful way to kind of educate her on the sensitivity of those type of comments and whatnot.
That's great.
You know, she does it to me, being David, and she might have done it to somebody else, and she might not just be educated on it.
That's fair. And it's a really good idea to take them aside also on the side, like you had said, just because when you're in a group, there's an added pressure. And whether or not you say it jokingly or not, it can always be taken as, oh, you just put Maria down, right? But it's great to kind of, you don't say it like that, that's what goes in my head. But,
No, but I may adopt that. Okay.
And so to take her aside later and say, hey, that really made me feel a little uncomfortable. I just want you to know that this isn't really okay with me. But I didn't want to embarrass you in front of the group, but I appreciate if you thought about that a little bit more. I think that's great. I hope it didn't put words in your mouth.
I was actually just gonna say that. I was gonna say that, you know, like she said that we're looked at as gods, and if the gods conflict with each other, especially in front of people who are sitting on the ground to be listening to us, it's probably not a very good example. And we are gonna be looked at less we will have less influence because of that, so.
That is a really good point you brought up, especially when you're working with a co-PLA and they say, even if it's just to answer your question or something happens and there's a bit of a disagreement, as much as you can, I mean, you're not trying to act and you definitely don't want to be like, oh yeah, Stephanie told you the wrong answer, but I'm just going to play it off because I don't want Stephanie to look bad. But there is a way to go about it that's going to make sure everyone feels comfortable in the session, because there's nothing more uncomfortable than if Johnnie-Margaret and I are up here like,
She didn't know what she's talking about.
okay. What? Right? So that's a great point. Thank you.
I think it hinges also on the sort of the context of, you know, what if it's not just an Asian American reference? It could be, you know, anything. It really depends on your own personal, if you take offense to it, if it doesn't matter to you. But as far as approaches to it, it's, I don't know, an idea, I don't know if it would work, but maybe not acknowledging it all, and not playing it off, not being direct about it, literally acting like they said nothing. So their imagination allows them to think like, oh, well, did I say something wrong? And they can sit there and stew on that for a little bit. And maybe if they're a decent person, they think they've offended you, they'll come up later and say, I'm sorry. If they're not a decent person, they probably won't come back. Or, you know, you can then after class go up and address it to them. Who knows?
I like the point you bring up, but sometimes just making it seem like it's never happened is enough to say it should not have happened, right? And I think that's fair. I do want to address a couple of things. The decent person, that's hilarious. I like that, but Sabo was mentioning earlier, and so was Richard, that sometimes people just don't know. And it's not necessarily their fault. Fault is a funny word. I hesitate to use it. But maybe they haven't had the opportunities, the windows as strongly as you have to know that there's a difference there in order for them to be really aware that that is something that's not okay. And I think that's a great point that Richard brought out. And it's not your responsibility at all to say, hey, we need to think about that in the future and let me open your world to this, you know, everything. It's not really your role. No one wants to put that on you. But if you're comfortable with it, that's a really great opportunity to kind of start opening their eyes in that direction. Does that make sense? Did I say that okay? a tricky one to deal with there. And then there's something else I wanted to talk about, but I'll think on that. Well, anyway, anybody else wanted to say anything? Then I guess the only thing I would want to add, while I'm still thinking, is that if this is something that maybe continues to be a problem with anybody in particular, whether it's a client or it's your co-PLA or it's a supervisor, anybody, anything that's going on, we don't want you to feel like you're in an uncomfortable spot or you're in a role that's weird. Whether or not you're on the I'm offended side or I'm not sure if I'm offending side, anything. Please come and talk to us about that. Johnnie-Margaret's already mentioned she's been in housing before, and we do a lot, and I have been too. We do a lot of work with this kind of, I guess, situation. We do a lot of training on it, and she is the master on all sorts of things like that. And if we don't have an answer for you to make it more comfortable, then we know where to go to find that answer. So please let us know if that ever becomes a problem.
You know, it's difficult because the research shows, and they are looking at faculty members, not tutors, so I want to be very clear about that, but that if a faculty member were to fail to actually address that, because it is in a public setting, back in a public setting, they have changed that dynamic immediately in that direction. And more often than not for the negative, all right? I have not given you enough skill training to be able to comfortably, for many of you, know how to address that. But there are many ways to go about it, and Saba was saying, you to reference what you were mentioning, it does occur, right? And people really are probably just trying to connect with you, I want to believe, you know? I want to believe that most people are kind and are there because they keep coming back because they like you. But taking the time to actually pause and either through, I'm not going to respond to you, and we're going to move forward, and I'm going to think on this, and I'm going to talk to Elizabeth, and I'm going to talk to Johnnie-Margaret. Or if you're witty, and I'm usually not witty like that because my feathers get ruffled, right? I know myself well enough that I have like a little switch like that. If you have, oh my goodness, if a student offends you and I know it, I'm in the room, step back, right? It's going to be dangerous. I have that in me. I may not look like it, but Elizabeth and I do have a wonderful long relationship, and she knows and she's seen me, and I don't look like that. It's just part of who I am. But some of you are wonderfully witty, right, and can come up with those ways in which to respond. And another thing that I would encourage you to do is make sure you have reconnected with that individual or set of individuals, just saying, you know, this kind of felt uncomfortable, right? And or did you notice that others were uncomfortable when this came about? And I'd really like to maybe talk about that again. And that would be a Johnnie-Margaret response. Because I know I can't do it at that moment because my feathers are ruffled, but I just want you to know I'm acknowledging what occurred and that I want to continue to talk on it. I'm not dismissing you, the person, right, or persons, but again, I'm challenging you all. You create these cultures, these spaces where students feel like they can be included and want to continue to be included. Because let me tell you, they'll go recruit more for you. And those of you who run large sessions, as I'm learning from you, you're really brilliant at how to kind of group them so they start to help themselves. And your impact is so even that much greater. I mean, when you heard, I hope, Chen Zhao give numbers, over 30,000 visits, and almost over 3,000 individual students within those visits that are touched because of the work you do. I mean, I would really like to argue to a certain degree that you change lives in ways that you'll never get to see. Many of us who work in teaching, sometimes that's the only way at night we can take a breath, right? Because there's just things that happen in any profession. There's ways to think about that. But you do big work, and I appreciate that. And as you can see, Ingrid is working on getting our our walls moved, and we have that wonderful lunch from McAllister's. We have a couple more housekeeping things while we get that finished. If you are a new team member, Christina's going to take your headshot. I warned you. Remember, it only stays within our circles, okay? We may put on detail just so we can see each other's faces. We have until 12:15 for lunch. Restrooms, I feel like, just down the hall, upstairs, if you need to go take a phone call. If you need to run somewhere, you can come back. That's not a big deal. But 12:15 is when we start. And about 12 o'clock, I'm going to put a copy of this fall schedule on your tables, all right? This is probably me just being overly cautious in my first fall of organizing. Please look for your name. If I have done anything inaccurately or your life has changed, some of you have gotten recent research opportunities, things like that, please circle and make a note, and I'll try to find you this afternoon. My goal is to try to update that while we're going into individual sessions between Ingrid and I, to get you a final copy before we leave out today. That's what I'm hoping to achieve, so I just need your eyes. Then, my last challenge in the immediate time is when you come back after grabbing your lunch, that you sit with different people. All right, so move yourself around, you leave your purses, and then kind of do that later. There should be a label on one of the trays that talks about gluten-free and other allergy needs. If for some reason we haven't met your need, please come see us. I'm actually gonna ask Elizabeth to go and start the line for us, because I wanna make sure she gets a little break and then she can get us started again this afternoon. But I'm hoping everybody's doing well. As a whole, we haven't exhausted you too much as you're going. Okay. Any questions before I think Ingrid has an update?
I would just like to offer, please, anyone who said they had any kind of a food allergy, to please come first.
Oh, perfect, thank you.
Because there's not a lot of the salad and other things, and let them get their meal first, and then we can smear what's done.
And then on the back side, you got drinks, tea, the famous McAllister's tea.
And I have one more announcement, I guess two. If at all possible, while you're going through the line, for those of us who do have allergies, in case there's enough for, going back later, please don't be barbaric. And please just get, your food from there to the plate and not mix it, because the cross-contamination can really bug some people to an extraordinary effect. And then my second announcement is for those of you who are working sessions later. I called you attendants. I'd really love to see you at some point, let's say, like in 10 minutes, like go grab your food or wait or something, over by these red bags. I just want to talk to you for a second. With that.
So let's do this. Elizabeth gets us started. Those of you who have some considerations, get in line. And attendance, why don't you get after them, right? Just to make sure. Because new people, you've got to go take a picture. You're going to get one to the end anyway. Oh, yes, have you done your eval? Why don't you just stack them in the middle? We'll come around since we got some free time. That'll be kind of fun. Yeah, exactly. Like, everybody needs a little extra. Yeah. Kevin, you doing okay? Solomon, you getting some new ideas? Good. I mean, we want to do everything right? We know we want. Those of us who've done it. So, you just got to be equipped to think about it and pull on it when we